All right, good morning, second grade students. Today for social studies, we are going to be looking at a rural area map. And so to start off our lesson today, we are going to be learning that there are different types of communities. So today we're going to be looking at one type, and then we're going to be looking at another type the next time that we have social studies. So again, there are different kinds of communities that are out there. And so most people today, they live in large cities. That's where most people have chosen to live. But a long time ago, most people lived actually on small farms, or they lived in very small communities. And this had partly to do with because our population has gotten so much bigger, not just in the United States, but around the whole world. And so these people who lived on small farms or in very small communities, many of them, they actually lived on farms. So the farm families would raise their own cows, chickens, and pigs. And that's how many of them would get their food, was from the animals and the plants that they grew or that they raised. So they would grow also their own corn, wheat, fruits, and garden vegetables. And so most of these families produced enough food for themselves. But as times have changed, later, better kinds of plants and better ways of growing crops were developed. So they were able to make better kinds of plants, and better ways of growing these crops were developed. And so also with that change, the methods of raising animals were also developed. Modern farm equipment was also invented, like the tractor and things like that, instead of using like oxen and a plow to do the work. And because of this, there were fewer people who needed to work on farms. So the changes in farming in the United States also led to the growth of cities and towns. So because fewer people were needed to produce the food on these farms, many people moved to the towns and cities. So today in the United States, fewer than 3 of every 100 people live on farms. So for every 100 people that you took in a group, fewer than 3 in that group would probably tell you that they lived on a farm right now. But the people who do still live on farms today, they can produce enough food to feed the world. So that is pretty cool. I know there's times that people say that farmers aren't really important nowadays because of all the technology that we have, but that is so not true. We still need farmers because they are the ones who give us a lot of the food that we have on our tables. So each farmer today can produce enough food to feed more than 80 people. So that's a fair amount of people that each farmer can feed. And so this is why farming continues to be a very important part of our communities and our lives. So the farming communities are also called rural areas. So if you hear somebody talk about rural areas, you know that that is also going to be known as farming communities, where you're out in the country and you're going to see barns and you're going to see cattle and a lot of land for growing crops. So the map on the right shows a map of a rural area. So on this map, we are shown 2 farms on it. So we notice on the left side of the road, we have one house here, and then we see a field of crops, and then we see the animals, and then we see the barn with the tractor, and they do have cars. And then on the right side, we see the house up here, and then we see that they have their land with all their crops, and we see the tractor, and then we see livestock, and then also their barn and silo. We also notice behind the farm on the right side is we see a road that says Route 35, and then we see kind of some bigger buildings here. And so we know that this is the way that you would go if you wanted to come into town. And we notice that the road out in this rural area is called County Road. So a lot of times when you go out in the country, a lot of the roads are going to be called Country Road something or County Road something. So in this case, it's County Road. So again, we just saw that there are 2 farms here shown on this rural map. And so in rural areas, there is a lot of land and few people. And so a country road used to be called a farm to market road. So farmers would take their products to nearby towns to sell. So this is still done today, but now because we have so much more technology, large trucks are now what carry the farm products to factories in towns and cities. So on this map, you would have the big trucks come out to these farms, collect the milk, eggs, livestock, whatever they were going to sell, and then those trucks would take it into town rather than the farmer doing it. So as with living anywhere, you're going to have advantages and disadvantages to living in those areas. So living in a rural area certainly does have its advantages and disadvantages just like anywhere else. So living in a rural area can have a disadvantage of there's not a lot of other people around you, which some people would see that as an advantage because some people really like the quietness of being in a rural area. Because if you live in a big town, you're going to have a lot of people making noise. You're going to have noise from cars and buildings and factories and all of that. Whereas living in the country, it's going to probably be pretty quiet living out there. So to some people, it can be seen as an advantage, and to some people, it's going to be seen as a disadvantage. So that's always an interesting way to look at that, is to one person, it's a great thing. To another person, that's what they don't want. Some people get so used to the hustle and bustle and all the noise of the city that if they went and lived in the country, they would be so confused of why it's so quiet out there. And if you were a person who grew up on a farm and then moved to a big city, you might not like that noise, or you might grow to really enjoy that over what you grew up with. So again, there are advantages and disadvantages to living in a rural area, just like there is to living in a big city, and it also depends on what kind of a person you are. All right, to wrap up our lesson, let's look at our vocabulary. So we've seen this vocabulary word before, community. And so to review, a community is a group of people who live together in the same area. One of our new words we're going to be looking at is countryside. And so a countryside is land away from cities and towns. Next up we have farm. And so a farm is land that a farmer uses to grow crops or raise animals. And lastly, we have rural area. And a rural area is a farming community or the countryside. All right, and that wraps up our social studies lesson for today.